You can check the option for live interpretation in your Zoom screen. For listening to the interpretation in Hindi, please switch to Hindi. Amit and Archana is helping us with the interpretation. Thank you, Amit and Archana. सबसे पहले आपको ये बताना चाहूंगा कि इस वेबिनार में हिंदी में ट्रांसलेशन का विकल्प है। जूम में मेन्यू में लैंग्वेज इंटरप्रिटेशन पर क्लिक से आपको हिंदी और इंग्लिश का विकल्प दिखेगा। अगर आप सत्र के दौरान अंग्रेजी में चल रही बातचीत को हिंदी में सुनना चाहे तो आप हिंदी का विकल्प चुन सकते हैं। आज के सत्र में अमित और अर्चना भाषा अनुवाद में हमारी मदद कर रहे हैं। अमित और अर्चना, आपका बहुत शुक्रिया। For better accessibility to this discussion, we will be providing a live summary of discussion in Hindi and English. Please keep watching the chat box for the same. Riya and Astitwa are helping us with this. Riya and Astitwa, thank you for help. साथ ही साथ चर्चा में भागीदारी में मदद के लिए हमारे साथ इस चर्चा के मुख्य बिंदुओं को साथ साथ चैट बॉक्स में लिखेंगे। इसके लिए आप चैट बॉक्स में रिया और अस्तित्व के मैसेज को देखिए। रिया और अस्तित्व, आपका बहुत शुक्रिया। So I will give a quick note about the organizers also. People Resource Center is a forum to create community resources for social transformation and to build perspectives and alternatives. People Resource Center engages with movement groups, communities in the places with the ongoing or potential struggle over resources, and regularly undertakes policy monitoring, research, documentation, and grassroots networking to generate resources for collective resistance and creative action. Institute for Democracy and Sustainability has carved out a niche for itself among the people-centric organizations, while working actively on the issues of social transformation, including sustainable urban transport, equal road rights, a right to livelihood, and urban agriculture for the last 3 decades. IDS is a constituent member of the National Alliance of People's Movement, NAPM, Sustainable Urban Mobility Network of India, SUMNET, Car Free Network, and is associated with several national and international forums. TRIP, TRIP at IIT Delhi is an interdisciplinary program focusing on the reduction of adverse health effects of road transport. TRIP attempts to integrate all issues concerned with transportation in order to promote safety, cleaner air, and energy consumption. Please follow our Facebook page of People Resource Center. We will paste a link of that in the chat box for update. We will also archive all the presentations, discussions, video recordings, and photo exhibition extra on our website. Meanwhile, you can follow our YouTube channel. We will also share the link of the YouTube channel chat box. So I will go through some of the modalities of the participation in this webinar. So panelists will present their work in 10 minutes. And after all of them complete their presentation, we will take questions. Please write your questions in the chat box. You may ask your questions in Hindi. And if you want to ask your questions by speaking, please wait till the end of the discussion. Depending on the available time, we will have participants speaking their views. For speaking, please raise your hands. There is an option for that in the Zoom application. We will try to take as many questions as possible. So please do share your questions. In case some of the questions are missed or could not be taken because of time limit, we will request panelists to respond to these in the follow-up email, which will be sent to all of the attendees. We will circulate a follow-up email to all the attendees to let the discussion continue, even beyond the webinar time limits. You can share questions, suggestions, feedback, articles, and other resources related to the discussion in the chat box or over an email. We request all the speakers to keep a slow pace. It will help in the translation as well as live interpretation. So now I welcome Nishant, who is a member of People's Resource Center, to take this session forward. Uh,
Yeah, thanks, Akiz. And sorry, everyone, on behalf of PRC again for starting late. This is the first session, and a lot of people who are joining us um, are known to us. Some of them are new. It's good to see everyone joining on the forum of Farming the City again. To start, I mean, we should acknowledge that we are meeting in a very crazy time, very scary also. And this reminds me of the previous Farming the City convention when we were meeting in April last year. And there was the similar strong wave of COVID going on. And we reflected on how urban farming makes more sense and talking about new urban alternatives in a time when we know that the system is not working at all. So I think it is very timely, but also very scary, context in which we are organizing this. To proceed further, I will invite Rajendra Ravi, who is the coordinator of People's Resource Center and director of Institute for Democracy and Sustainability, to give a welcome note for this inaugural session of Farming the City 2021. Rajendra Ravi.
धन्यवाद अकीज और निशांत। काफ़ी विस्तार से आप लोगों ने अपनी बात रखी और कार्यक्रम के बारे में जो अलग अलग पक्ष है वो भी रखा आपने। मैं सभी जो भागीदार हैं, जो पार्टिसिपेंट्स हैं, जो हमारे स्पीकर्स हैं और अलग अलग शहरों से, अलग अलग समूहों से जो साथी जुड़े हैं, उन सब का हम स्वागत करते हैं। आज का जो विषय है वो फार्मिंग द सिटी के साथ जो नई शहरियत की जो दिशाएं हैं, एक न्यू अर्बनिज्म, आइडिया ऑफ न्यू अर्बनिज्म के ऊपर जो विगत कई दशकों से हम लोग अलग अलग समय में अलग अलग समूहों के माध्यम से जो काम करते रहे हैं, उससे जो अनुभव आए हैं, उसका जो निचोड़ निकल रहा है, वह यही इसी बात की ओर इंगित करता है कि चाहे हम अर्बन ट्रांसपोर्ट के ऊपर काम करें, साइकिल रिक्शा, बस, पैदल यात्रियों के लिए काम करें, शहर में रोजगार, पर्यावरण, कचरा प्रबंधन, किसी भी सवाल पे काम करें, वो टुकड़े टुकड़े में होते हुए भी एक बड़े नज़रिए का हिस्सा अगर बनता है, तभी हम इसकी समाधान की ओर बढ़ेंगे। पिछले 4 दशकों में हम लोगों ने अलग अलग संस्थाओं के माध्यम से, अलग अलग समूहों के माध्यम से इस पे इन सब सवालों से जूझते रहे हैं और नई दिशा की तलाश करते रहे हैं। आज हम जहाँ पहुँचे हैं उसमें मेरे जो राजनीतिक सरोकार रहे हैं उसका एक बड़ा इसमें मददगार साबित हुआ है। सबसे पहले हमने यह काम को लोकायन से शुरू किया, लोकायन के बाद फिर इंस्टीट्यूट फॉर डेमोक्रेसी एंड सस्टेनेबिलिटी जो अभी इसका सहकार है उसके माध्यम से शुरू हुआ, फिर इंस्टीट्यूट या पीपल्स रिसोर्स सेंटर। और इस पूरी यात्रा में जो सबसे सकारात्मक पक्ष रहा कि जो एकेडमिक जो हिस्सा है, एकेडमिक जो पक्ष है, वो ग्रासरूट पे जो इशू है, ग्रासरूट पे जो समस्याएं हैं, उसका एकेडमिक तरीके से कैसे जवाब ढूंढा जा सकता है और एकेडमिक ग्रासरूट के जो समस्याएं हैं उससे कैसे सीख सकते हैं। यही वजह है कि ट्रीप जो आईआईटी का एक बहुपक्षीय विभाग है, उनके साथ हमारा लगभग 3 दशकों का संबंध है। जो समस्याओं से हम लोग जूझते हैं शहर में, उसका एक बौद्धिक पक्ष क्या है, उसका तकनीकी पक्ष क्या है, और जिन बौद्धिक पक्षों से वो लोग जूझते हैं उसका नीचे की तरफ क्या दिक्कतें हैं, उस पे हम लोग साझा करते हैं। हम लोग मूल तौर पे जो पिछले साल फार्मिंग द सिटी कॉन्फ्रेंस किए थे, उसका ये दूसरा साल है। उसमें हम लोगों ने देखा कि उसको हम लोगों ने यह देखा और महसूस किया कि अगर इसको हम अलग-अलग नज़रिए से देखते हैं, तो शायद हम भटक जाएँगे, शायद हम एक सही दिशा में नहीं जा पाएँगे। तो अलग मुद्दे पे काम करते हैं, लेकिन बहस और मुहावसे जो है, वो एक नई अवधारणा को डेवलप के लिए करते हैं। तो आज का विषय जो फार्मिंग इन द सिटी का एक तरह से उद्घाटन का एक औपचारिकता है। तो हम लोगों ने शुरुआत की है कि जो न्यू आइडिया ऑफ न्यू अर्बनिज़्म, नई शहरियत की क्या दिशाएँ हो सकती है और इस पे हम साझे तौर पे कैसे मिलकर के आगे बढ़ सकते हैं इस दिशा में। इसके लिए जो हमारे फार्मिंग द सिटी का जो अनुभव है, उसके बारे में हमारे साथी निशांत रखेंगे अपनी बात को, और इसके साथ हमारे बहुत ही अजीज मित्र सुजीत पटवर्धन और रोहित नेगी, जो अम्बेडकर यूनिवर्सिटी से हैं, वो अपनी बात साझा करेंगे। बहुत सारे साथी जो अपने-अपने क्षेत्रों के विशेषज्ञ हैं, आज इस कार्यक्रम में जुड़े हुए हैं। हमारी अपेक्षा होगी कि वे लोग सक्रिय तौर पे इस चर्चा को आगे बढ़ाएँ, ताकि साझे तौर पे जो चुनौती है, उसको हम लेकर के समाधान की तरफ बढ़ें। ख़ास करके पिछले 2 सालों से जिस तरह से पैंडेमिक आया है और पैंडेमिक का जो दूसरा लहर है, जो हम लोग सोच रहे थे कि शायद इस साल ऐसा नहीं होगा। पिछले साल पैंडेमिक की वजह से ही हम लोग को ऑफ़लाइन के बजाय ऑनलाइन करना पड़ा था, और इस बार लगा था कि थोड़ी-सी राहत होगी, लेकिन अचानक 2 सप्ताह से वह लहर काफ़ी गहरे तौर पे आ गया है, और वह यही दिशा दे रहा है, यही बता रहा है कि आप कुछ भी कर लेंगे, चाहे आपकी जीडीपी बढ़ जाएगी, आपका शहर में बड़े-बड़े इंफ्रास्ट्रक्चर आ जाएँगे, लेकिन अगर शुद्ध भोजन, शुद्ध हवा और सादा रहन-सहन नहीं होगा, तो आपके पास संसाधनों की कमी नहीं होगी, लेकिन आप चुनौतियों से उबर नहीं पाएँगे। इसी के साथ मैं अपनी बात यहीं पे समाप्त करता हूँ और निशान से आग्रह करता हूँ कि इस परिचर्चा को वो आगे बढ़ाएँ। धन्यवाद।
Shukriya, Ravi ji. The program is structured in such a way, we are going to give, is there a noise? Sorry. Ravi ji, agar mute kar lijye. So, I will start with a brief presentation on the journey of farming the city and our research on urban agriculture and other interlinkages with urban structural issues. And then I will probably give very brief sketch of how it can be integrated into a larger, broader framework for a new urbanism, which is more ecological, self-reliant, and more decentralized and cooperative. So a lot of people who have joined us today, I remember that they were also with us in the previous Farming the City convention, but some of us were not there. And it will be good to reflect on the experience of the Farming the City previous edition. We organized Farming the City last year. It was, as Raviji was saying, we wanted to organize it as an offline meeting, not a very large gathering, probably of 50-60 people who were interested in pursuing this agenda of farming in the city. And they were also involved in some ways to different activities, for example, maybe doing terrace gardening, kitchen gardening, waste management, composting, and so on. So we thought it would be good to gather together and listen to each other's experiences and views. But as so happened, pandemic hit us, and then we had to organize it online. And more than 550 people joined us last year over the course of 6 days of the convention. And it was really memorable, and it was a great learning experience for, I think everyone would agree, that we got to know about so many experiments going on in different settings and geographies. One of the things that we realized in the previous Farming the City was that there is also a need to do more research in different contexts, because a lot of people are doing or practicing urban farming or different they're involved in some different activities, as I said, but there's less reporting, less documentation, and less research on what the outcomes or the achievements of these activities are. And that is important because if we want to make it a systemic intervention, it is very necessary to actually document their contribution in their individual capacities so that it can be made as a network or made, or it could be pushed as a policy intervention, or can be integrated into urban planning and so on. Towards that, I think we started working more holistically to reach out to people in different Indian cities who could be companion in our journey to understand about urban farming, and to also do research which could be applied for more policy level push and so on. As I presented last year, some of you would remember that in the first session, we presented our work on the urban farming in Delhi. And I think we expected that this would be new for a lot of people, that, people would wonder that whether there is urban farming going on at such a scale in Delhi. And I think people are amazed that they were, beyond our expectation. There was no, this kind of knowledge of activities going on the floodplains or fishing going on in the upper stretches of Yamuna. So these were kind of new things to present to people who are not exactly farmers in Delhi, or have not been doing research in Delhi, or in the peri-urban Delhi specifically. So for them, it kind of visibilized the whole set of activities which contribute in the ecology and sustainable existence of people living in Delhi. For example, we got to know, not from our primary research, but from a secondary source, which is based on a paper by Anu Ramaswamy. And it was published in 2017. So they estimated through various accounts that there's about 15% of the food demand of Delhi being met by urban farming. Within the administrative boundaries of Delhi, whatever farming is going on, that feeds about, or that supplies to the 15% of the food demands of Delhi. And if we want to, also set this in a environmental perspective or carbon footprint perspective, we can understand that, we can understand it better in the sense that the current carbon footprint, or not the carbon, but greenhouse gas emissions for production and the transportation of food that is consumed in Delhi is about 1 lakh crore tons of greenhouse gas annually. So if 15% of that is coming from inside the boundary, I think it is a major contribution of urban farming in terms of climate and environmental sustainability. Other things we also got to know that this varies according to commodities. much of the vegetable, I think 25 to 30% of the vegetables are produced, which are consumed in Delhi, are produced within the administrative boundary of NCT of Delhi. And similarly for milk, it is even higher. And for meat, I think it is about 50 to 60%. So a lot of food that is consumed, and also depending on what kind of food we are talking about, is being produced by the farmers who are doing farming within Delhi. So this kind of dispels the myth that there is no significant farming going on, or it is. I mean, in terms of maybe people employed in these activities, it might not be that significant. Of course, we know that it is about 1 to 3%, somewhere in the middle of it. The people, or the including the migrant workers who come and work on these fields. So it might not look that significant because because of the urban character of Delhi and different economic activities going on, which consume more labor. But in terms of the demands being met and sustainability, it is very significant. Similarly, the research we did was mostly qualitative and extensive. And it, we covered all of Delhi over the period of 8 months or so. And I would acknowledge that this time, rather than later, the contribution of Radheshyam Mangolpuri ji, Nanu Prasad ji, and of course Rajendra Ravi ji, who were the key persons involved in the research activity. And we have come up with a detailed book covering the different aspects of urban farming in Delhi, which is available on our website. And we will also show a slide with its highlights. So what we got to know in that research is that there is definitely a decline in interest in pursuing farming as, career is not a good word because it is not suitable, but even as an economic activity or part-time activity, because there are so many hindrances pushed by the government, the state, the planning agencies, and the regulators that make it more difficult, not easier, for the farmers to keep the cultivation going on. For example, in Yamuna floodplains, it's deemed illegal to do any kind of farming. And we know by the recent 2020 order of NGT, any kind of farming activity on the whole stretch of Yamuna floodplains is termed illegal, and DDA has been directed to evict any farmers or any kind of what they call as encroachers as soon as possible. A lot of the evictions are already going on. Crops have been raised and demolitions have been done. And this has a history. Farmers have been facing this. Someone is asking pesticides, so I should clarify that at this moment. In the same NGT case, which is Manoj Mishra versus Union of India, a famous case who is following Yamuna river and its ecology and environmental concerns. So in the same case, there was constituted a monitoring committee which had directed CPCB, which is the Central Pollution Control Board, to do a study on whether or on the toxicity levels of the vegetables produced in the region. So when the CPCB came up with the report, they showed that none of their samples had toxicity level increasing the, whatever their standard of toxicity is. So none of the vegetable samples they collected were toxic. Why? They found out because nobody is using Yamuna water. The farmers are wise enough not to use the polluted water. They're using groundwater. Of course, that is not sustainable in the longer term, but at least for now, they are doing farming. They're supplying to the city. They are, they're contributing in their own way to the environmental concerns of Delhi. by not using Yamuna water. And of course, if Yamuna gets cleaned and farming continues, so it would be interesting, it would be easier for farmers to use Yamuna water rather than doing a borewell. So a lot of these things have not come up in the public imagination, in the media, and in the policymakers' concerns, because one of the things which makes urban farming a really contentious subject is the land. So the land is right in the middle of a mega city, and it is, I mean, if a poor farmer is doing farming there, it's like the most worthless thing that can be done on the land. For the DDA, for the big policymakers or the people who are visionaries of cities. So that is one of the things we want to highlight, and we want to frame, we want to kind of make urban farming, that is the perspective we have for arguing for urban farming, that it has to go beyond, and it has the potential to make us bring our imagination beyond the typical speculative extractivist urbanism that we see in our mega cities, and which is also entering into the smaller cities in India now, where the real estate developers speculate on the land, build apartments, build all kinds of crazy things which are not sustainable at all, bring people to live there, and people remain unsatisfied, and the environmental degradation also goes on parallelly, and the whole public infrastructure and the basic services and so on get those don't reach to the people just because it is designed not to. And there is a vested interest to use the urban resources in the most hazardous, most wasteful, and most selfish manner. So I'm focusing more on Delhi's case for now, because I think it is important for many people who have joined us in this convention for the first time to know the work that we have been arguing over the year in the Farming City, starting from the Farming City first, and then over the year we have organized a lot of meetings, public seminars to just present our case. Needless to say, nothing has happened, of course, but I think a lot of people are now more aware about about the things which are happening to Delhi and the long-term effect that is going to stay for a lot of people living in Delhi. I would also like to tell more about the specific demographic findings that we had, reported based on the research. First of all, I think majority of the workforce in the urban farming in Delhi is women. We are of course including the migrant workers or the tenant farmers in Delhi, because the land holding is a very complex issue again, because of its contestation with the DDA, because DDA claims that a lot of land on which farming is going on belongs to DDA. It has been already transferred by some arrangements way back in 60s or 70s and over the years. But that's not the full truth. The farmers who claim to have the ownership of land contest that. There are legal cases going on. But if we just look at the actual activities going on rather than looking at the land ownership and land holding, the people actually doing the activities are either tenant farmers, workers, and a school insignificant proportion, the people actually owning the land or claiming to own the land. So the total workforce, we found that it is predominantly women. One of the things which we got to know, why is this so, is because men sometimes go and find some other work. But for women, it's a very good job and a meaningful job, which they can do very close to their homes. And the homes we are talking about are the kacha houses they built within the fields they have either rented or they are working on. And this I think this is something which is very commonly, which can be very commonly seen all over the Delhi in the peri-urban areas, in all the places, Najafgarh, Palla, Chilla Khadar, and all the floodplains areas. Second thing we got to know was about different kind of migration. I mean, various kinds of migratory seasons, if we can call it. Workers come in different seasons for different kinds of crops. So, for example, for mushroom, they will come in a different season, and different kinds of workers will come. They have their own contact in Delhi, and they will be invited. They will be called or something, contacted by a set person who calls them annually. Similarly for the paddy to some extent, and also for vegetables. And depends on the crops they are working on, and they have special skills to work on. Their migration pattern, that depends on the crop they work on. Another thing, just about the women being the predominant workforce, it's also consistent with the findings we found in the literature in all over the, in all of the global south especially, but also largely in the urban farming literature. If you look at the proportion of, gender distribution of workforce, is predominantly women who work on the urban farms. So in that sense, Delhi's findings are quite consistent with that. I think also we need to mention about the peri-urban farming and urban villages. They are completely ignored. If we talk to anyone who has been living there, none of the basic necessities have reached. They haven't been given anything which has even been promised in the master plans over the years. And there are communities, there are associations of various urban village dwellers who have been pushing for recognition, for provision of basic services. For example, there's no health center, there's no school, there's no other roads or so on. So these things are yet to reach. Second, there is de facto kind of concretization going on, despite those places being categorized as urban villages, but their rural character has already disappeared. Very few people now want to do farming, so they have all built, houses, concrete houses, in the places where they used to do farming. A lot of water commons have disappeared because over the years there was no there was no preservation, or there was no use. Now people are realizing that it is very important for because the government is not providing the basis of necessity, and it probably cannot provide the necessities in such a manner. So people are coming back to realizing that the ponds, the smaller water bodies that they had in their neighborhoods, they need to restore that. But the government's stance is that they want to build, they consider these things as public property or public land, and they are building their own crazy projects on those. For example, one case we are aware of in the Western Delhi is on the pond, community pond that was there. And the Delhi government is now building a recreational facility on that. They have already dumped a lot of mud, and they have prepared the ground for building that. So the villagers and community is fighting against that. So this is going on, and this has happened over the years in Delhi, as we came to know. One of the things, I mean, all the problems I have counted, but one of the good things that we found, or hopeful things that we encountered, was a lot of young people have come to take up farming as a business or as a smaller agri-venture, agri-business kind of initiatives. Mostly what they are growing is what we can call as exotic vegetables or exotic food, which they sell to either the retail chains or the hotels which consume these vegetables. In the previous Farming the City, we also heard Vishal, who is a very active farmer in Palla, and how he's looking at his initiative in Palla village of Delhi. Other things, I think I'll maybe stop with the presentation on Delhi with the mention of a lot of composting and waste management activities which people are doing at their own local decentralized level. In fact, I'm aware that a lot of people in this meeting at this time are, I mean, the people who do their own waste management, solid waste management, and they use that for their terrace farming, kitchen gardens. I think we will also have Kapil presenting on the day 2 morning session, who works on this concept of composting and using that to create giving this kind of rented lands for people to grow their own food. I mean, he will explain the model. Apart from that, I think it's very fascinating to know about the food that you eat and where it is coming from. I mean, of course, you cannot trace every bit of it, but it's always important to know what hurdles and what difficulties your food has come across to reach to your plate and you are having. I'm speaking specifically from the urban middle class consumer point of view. But for those who are conscious about environment, for those who are conscious about community and their rights, I think urban farming is an intersection of all these issues, and more visible than many other urban issues if we understand it in this manner. I think I will now transition to the broader idea of why we why we have been focusing on urban farming so much. And over the years, I think we have come to realize that people are noticing PRC's work mostly by the urban farming work that we have done. So one of the things is that I think this can also be an instrument, a device, a conceptual device even, for actually imagining something very radically restructural in the Indian cities. I'm not talking about in general any city, but also Indian cities. For Indian cities, I think it is very, it can give a lot of concrete ideas to imagine how we can reorganize different urban systems so that there is more or less synergy between them. And all, I mean, as a whole, the urban centers behave more responsibly and sustainably. And one of the ideas which we started with was self-reliance, and that should be attributed duly to Rajendra Vijay. And he has been working and developing this idea for years, that we talk about self-sustainability of villages. And even Gandhi also had a model of Gram Swaraj in which villages were more or less self-sufficient. They used to have this kind of relationship with other villages and other places, but every village for its own needs was more or less self-sustaining and self-reliant. And because Gandhi was not very keen to talk about cities, I think this idea has not been developed so very neatly. If there can be a similar um, concept of a city which is self-reliant for its needs, and for that, as Rajendra was saying, we need to be more simple. We need to follow more simple lifestyle. And by simple, it doesn't mean we need to be poor, but we need to be wise in terms of how we organize the systems in a city to fulfill everyone's needs, but not for the luxury, but not for the wastage, and so on. Also, what we realized was that we talk about food security, and it has become, in fact, there's a huge demand for right to food and so on. And there's also acknowledgement of deteriorating nutrition in the food that everyone eats, not just the poor, or it's not a class issue. It's a global phenomenon that the food we are eating is no more nutritious, and the nutritional component is going down. And in this context, one of the things we realize and we consider is important is the distance between the food production site and the consumption site. Over the years with the globalization, I think it has become quite common to people to take it for granted that you can get anything at any time because there are huge storage facilities, and the global supply chain has been so sort of developed that people can get anything if they can pay the price at any place at any time. And in this sense, I think we will have the evening session to deal with this issue more. We can also see the disconnect between the urban and the rural, not just places, not just people, but also the whole culture, the whole imagination, and the way and the worldview. The urban people have more commanding kind of lifestyle and worldview that they can command based on the price, and the command depends on the purchasing power and so on. While in the rural setting, relatively speaking, we can sense a more codependent, cooperative lifestyle in which the needs have to be met in a more it depends on the community, if the community can fulfill the needs or not, and that determines individual behavior too. But I think if you go back to the history, just 1 minute to give it a perspective, I think even in the till late 19th century, in most of the industrial cities, even in the West, some or the other form of urban farming was going on. There was animal rearing, there were big piggeries. We see those accounts in a lot of commentators, economists, commenting about the condition of cities, and they say the piggeries in the middle of the city they are so ugly, and it should be removed. So till the 19th century, even in the industrial towns, London and so on, we see that urban farming is still a feature of these modern capitalist cities. Over the years, with the planning, when the planners became the key people to construct a city, to create a city, rather than to plan city or the city planning itself, or the city people making their own city according to the evolving needs of the different people. The planners were some people who came to form. Excuse this sound. So the people, the planners were the people who started taking control of urban planning, and I think with that, the urban agriculture found no place in the city, in the middle of the city. Also, with the railways, I think this is also important, that the transportation became efficient, so people could get the food from longer distances, which they could not before this kind of efficient transportation facilities. So now fast forward to our time, and what we are seeing today is that because urban people do not want to take a moment to think about their food, the capitalist and the industry has a great advantage to push for things which further alienate people from their food, and to create technological interventions, to create efficiencies, to create all kinds of developments, so that you get very nice looking package of food, irrespective of what the quality is, from places where probably there's oppression and extortion and violence going on, to the places where people are more comfortable, and they are putting they're selling their labor just to afford to eat the food. So I think in this system, it's very important to bring the food back into the city, back into the direct encounter of city dwellers, so that they know that the food is produced in such a manner. This is the food we are eating. Sometimes, I mean, a lot of people can take up activities of farming themselves, producing their own food. To some extent, people are already stepping, very tiny minority of people, but still people have shown interest in growing their own food and so on. And that's why it would make sense to push it through planning measures to policy measures, based on the best available research that can be possible. In the wider idea of ecological cities, I think we also want to integrate it with the idea of livelihoods, because people who migrate to cities have their own knowledge, which is averaged out, or actually invisibilized in a sense. They are treated as a labor, and sometimes these absurd categories of skilled labor and unskilled labor and semi-skilled labor and so on. So the loss of knowledge that happens for people who are migrating from rural centers to urban centers is a huge one, which is unaccounted, unreported, and unreported, and it and I mean, because we do not understand it as a GDP loss, so it will never make sense to those who plan for cities and make policies for it. Similarly, not just the knowledge or the livelihood, but also the waste. For example, in every city we see, when we enter the city, you know the city has come, you have arrived the city. When you see the whole garbage mountain at the entrance of the city or the town. So every city has this great emblem of urbanization, where the waste is piled as a mountain. And in Delhi, we are proud to have 4 mountains, probably, or 3 though we already had. And not just the waste being piled up, but I mean, it's very common to get catch fire and also create damage for the communities living there. So what is the way out? Can you actually process the whole garbage that is piled up as a mountain through some techno invention and just make it disappear? I think it's simply impossible. And we need to find ways in which we can decentralize the waste management at the local level where the waste is generated, and also to minimize the generation of waste, so that there's very less amount of any substance which we should call waste. And waste, I think, is something that we do not know how to value. So we need to find ways to create less substances which we do not know how to value, and also to know how to value the substances which we have already created. And in that sense, urban farming is one of the most key interventions which can consume a lot of waste that actually reaches the landfill sites. I think I can go on, but there is also time here. So I think I will stop, but I will just show a very small presentation on the PRC's work over this year, so that it just a second. Okay. Yeah. So I think I did talk about these things. Yeah, I think just to also highlight this part, that in our imagination for a new urbanism, for a more ecological urbanism, urban-rural should be understood not as a very distinct category, but as a continuum, and also a very flexible kind of relationship. There could be features of city in the villages which are already visible. If you look at the villages, there are all kinds of corporate branding, advertisement, packaged food, and so on reaching the villages. And the village is disappearing from the cities and towns. There should be balance. We need to imagine cities which have more rural character. So it's some kind of agenda for rurification of cities. And it will also have, it will also make a sense if villages take the necessary urban character, which makes sense for their ecology, for their communities. And we also need to move beyond this kind of characterization of cities as parasitic. Of course, our current cities are parasitic. There's no doubt about that. But the cities as such have to be parasitic. We have to be skeptical about that, and we need to reimagine the departure from this kind of parasitic urban development that we have for now. And it also needs to be seen. I mean, sometimes it is understood that villages are pristine and cities are degraded. I mean, they degrade the environment and so on. But I think we need to go back to the idea of the earlier urbanists, such as Mumford and Patrick Geddes, who understood cities as an indicator of progressive sensibility. Of course, if we look at the cities which we have now, the indicator tells us that we are alarmingly, worse off in terms of our progressive sensibilities. But the cities have to be planned, considering that the cities as we plan are going to be the indicators of how progressive our sensibility has, how progressively our sensibilities have evolved since whatever we call as the civilizational period of humanity. And in that sense, in India, it makes more sense to look at smaller cities. Whenever we think of cities in India, suddenly and without any effort, always Delhi, Mumbai, and Bangalore come to our attention. A lot of research that goes on the urban centers is focused on these mega cities. The connections and the theories which have developed on Indian cities is also mostly through the lens of bigger mega cities, which needs to change, which we have tried to do in the last 1 year. And our urban fellows who have done research in 6 different cities will present our work in the consequent sessions. And it probably has brought a more nuanced understanding of this kind of the relationship which we are talking about, rural, urban, and this kind of gray area which we call as urban-rural interface, and whatever activities, whatever imagination the people have in these areas, and that can provide us some thoughts on better pathways for a sustainable future. As I said, this is the book which is available on our website. It's a primary survey of urban agriculture in Delhi. It's in Hindi. We also have a summary in English and in Hindi, which is also available on the website. We will try to do a translation, English translation of this, but whoever is present and listening and interested in this work, we would really appreciate if someone can come along and do translate it in more Indian languages and in other languages. Based on this work, for more reach and better accessibility for people to know about these issues, because the book is a whole lot of stuff to read. We created these 6-7 booklets on different aspects, covering the different aspects of Delhi, the farming in Delhi. These are bilingual, and these are available on the website again. And these have very nice pictures which you can go and see. Okay. We also believe, one of the aspects that I could not touch upon, that any idea for this kind of new urbanism, ecological cities, and so on, has also to be internationalist in a sense. It needs to learn from experiences, motivations, and take inspiration from people doing similar activities and fighting for similar changes all across the world. With that spirit, we also organized this international panel where people from war torn geographies, Syria, Palestine, and Lebanon, presented how communities in these countries are using urban farming as a method to organize themselves, and in a more self-reliant manner, and also ecologically, because we got to know that a lot of people there are also going back to the seeds, or reclaiming the seeds and the knowledge associated with that, to grow food for the people who have neither the state nor the any other providers to give them food or so on. So for them, urban farming is a method, is the only method probably
क्या हुआ निशांत?
Can't hear anything now.
आवाज नहीं आ रही निशांत?
Yeah, due to some technical fault, Nishan might have got disconnected. Wait a minute.
दिख ही नहीं रहा पार्टिसिपेंट।
Arcus, can you please take over? We can move on to the next person now.
Yeah, sorry for this technical fault. You can find our publications, which Nishan was talking about, on the website. So our website's link is in the chat box. So I guess we'll move on. So yeah, so I request Sujit Patwardhan kindly.
Yeah, you can remove that visual from there, I think.
Yeah, I can.
Share screen. Huh.
Yeah.
Thank you. Okay,
Sorry,
I am having
network disconnected.
No, so Nishant is here. Oops.
Yeah, so I think presentation was more or less done. A lot of these things are all available on our website, and we will welcome any feedback, suggestions, and engagement from people present here. Now, I think we can take a 2 minutes break if everyone is okay with that. And then we will have comments and viewpoints from Sujit ji and Professor Negi.
okay.
Okay, I think I was not audible at some time, and then yeah. So I think let's start with Sujit ji, and we have time for questions and answers. So probably you can keep sharing your comments and questions in the chat box. Akiz or Akshita will take a note of that, and we will have those questions one by one as the time permits. Sujit ji, now I want to invite Sujit Patwardhan, who is founder and trustee of Parisar, which was established way back in late 80s, and one of the most phenomenal and one of the first environmental civil society organizations, which has done a commendable work over the years on the issues of environment and urban planning and so on. It would be great to hear him. Yeah, okay. I pass on
just
to
have a
Sujit ji.
question. There are two things. One is my mic is defective, so if people don't hear me, please either raise your hand or tell me to speak even louder. though I'm speaking quite loudly right now and my voice is anyway quite loud. But I don't want people to miss out. Second thing is that do you want me to react to what has been said or just make my points first? What is
I
the
think you,
format?
no, it's okay. I mean, you can make your own point.
Okay.
If you want to react, that's okay.
Yeah, well, in making my points, I might react slightly in that. I think that thank you first for calling me for this program, which is very
सुजीत
interesting.
भाई थोड़ा ऊंचा बोलिए.
हाँ वही मैं कोशिश कर रहा हूँ पर मेरे साउंड सिस्टम जरा खराब हो गई है तो इसलिए मैं
So usually you can also try keeping the mic closer.
yeah it is actually
It's audible, but I mean it's okay.
it's here so it's right in
Hmm.
probably giving enough volume.
Yeah.
Okay, but as long as you can hear something even softly, I think I'll continue. Um, Otherwise, I'll have to switch over to my mobile, which will again waste some time. So I would like to begin by saying that this is a very good venture which has been started and something which we as an environmental organization have also been interested in. And Shahari Kheti, although the focus I think began when Raviji and Nishant were working on this was on trying to document how much food is grown in the city, how people are either buying land and or growing food in their um, uh, let's say the uh, places just out, on the outskirts of the city where they have farmhouses and either doing it themselves or letting it out to somebody else. My The point I wanted to raise was that in all this is of course a very useful work, but I think that there is a need for also looking at the environmental part of the urban farming. Not that you're not looking at it, but I think that little more stress because not just the fact that so many people are employed, whether there is a tussle between the land ownership between the people who are growing food and the DDA, like authorities, which are trying to describe them as encroachers, but also the fact that it is possible for urban farming to take on a more environmentally benign role, which is impossible for the big corporations which today are controlling our food. And I think that when Parisar was started, soon after that we were lucky to come across Masanobu Fukuoka, who has got a masterpiece of one straw revolution, which he calls do nothing farming, and he believes entirely in playing along with the nature and going along with nature to do your farming. He excludes all chemical fertilizers, all chemicals, and although Mr. Fukuoka himself was a agricultural scientist, so it is not some novice doing some work in agriculture, but a person who, having seen the way the Japanese scientific organization is promoting food, realize that there are limits to what can be done through artificial means, and that is slowly become uh, acceptable now. Rachel Carson's book of Silent Spring showed how the pesticides like DDT were putting poison into our food, and I remember many years back an issue of India Today, which was quite a shock, showing that how much poison are you eating? Because normally India Today wasn't much concerned about this level of environmentalism. But it was very interesting. And now a situation has come where in Pune and many other cities, I think people are willing to go out of their way to look for food which is grown in an organic manner. That means free from chemicals, free from pesticides or fertilizers, and grown in a much more nature-friendly manner. So I think this part of urban farming is also very important. And every year we hear about all the smog coming into Delhi because of the stubble burning, and in organic agriculture, there is no such thing as waste which needs to be burnt. You know, the stubble would, I am not a farmer, I am not an expert, but I know that it is possible to use the agricultural waste as something which will regenerate the soil. And the other extreme, of course, about which person like Vandana Shiva has written a lot, called the violence of the Green Revolution. The so-called Green Revolution in Punjab, which depended so much on irrigated water supply on a massive scale, has led to a sterility of the soil. That means soil is no longer fertile, and the food crops are, getting less and less every year, while you go on adding to the fertilizers. Also, the change in cropping pattern, because of lots of water, they are now growing sugarcane. So things, such kind of um, uh, very odd results. Um, you can hear me still, because I'm getting a message saying my internet connection is bad. My voice is okay so far, even if it's soft.
No, I think I can hear. I can hear very
Okay,
clearly.
thank you, thank you. So all these anomalies which are present in the present agricultural thinking, which is supported by the government, because every year government gives subsidy to fertilizers. Although fertilizers are no good for the soil, they are giving subsidies. They are giving subsidies for weedicides, which are killing a lot of other species which are required for propagation of food. So I think we are at a very interesting stage where, whether it is agriculture, whether it's transportation, whether it is medicine, whether it is city planning, um, or water resource planning, or even building construction, we are at a stage where the thinking which had taken hold for the last, maybe perhaps a century, 100 years, is now being challenged. Everybody is asking questions that whether this is the right way, and people are. The answer is coming from the number of people who are now looking for poisonless food. They are looking for water resource management in a way where every year you won't have floods, and crazy ideas of river linking are being questioned. Though that's the official line, that you need to link the rivers so that the water from less or drought prone areas receive water from excessive water areas. And it is again another example of trying to dominate nature. And the more we play in tune with nature, I think the more success we are going to have. So I think that it's a very interesting stage where it is not necessary suddenly to find majority of people challenging the system. um, uh, but even few people who give examples, because I take part in a lot of civic issues, where the other day they were talking about groundwater, and I was surprised to know, because again I am not an expert on groundwater, but I was told that the majority of crops in India, the entire country, are dependent more on groundwater than on irrigation water. And the government, on the other hand, is singing praise of dams. There are wars going on between how to share the water between Karnataka and Maharashtra and other cities, other states, and international wars will take place over water like this. But even people like Anupam Mishra, who has uh, who has been such a soft-spoken person, if you look at his YouTube videos, you will see that he has gone into the details of how uh, areas where there's very little rainfall can also conserve water. And his books are translated into so many languages, not just in India, but even outside. The last time I met him, he said that in some part of Africa, his book was going to be published. Unfortunately, he's no more. But his wisdom, I think, remains in the work he has done. So I think it's a very interesting stage of human life on the earth, where some of the earlier um, men dominated or human dominated discoveries are now being questioned, and the nature is going to be allowed to have a hopefully a better position where one uses the environment in a manner where it will not be a fight between humans and the environment, but rather playing in tune with nature. So I think that uh, this is my main observation and main thing I wanted to say. I know that 10 minutes are given to everybody, but I think I will not even need these 10 minutes, but I'll just give a few examples which further illustrate this, how the connections are very important. Because when we talk about irrigated and big dams, you have to rely on companies like Monsanto, which is actually selling poison. Because what does Monsanto do? It tells you that um, uh, I'm trying to read the comments also, which is difficult, but I'll not, distract myself. I'll read them later on. Thank you for those who are responding, but I find it difficult to, multitask. Women are better at this multitasking. Men are extremely bad at it. So I think that what is the connection between big dams, which are I know, many of you are connected with NAPM, and I have also been connected with Narmada Bachao Andolan struggle for many years, and people who are questioning the efficacy of big dams. Now, all over the world, there is a big question mark about whether huge dams should be built, whether huge agricultural production, depending on mechanized agriculture, is the right way to go. And especially the sterile seeds, which are sold by companies like Monsanto and Bayers, which actually are in the poison business, are, they're claiming that your crop will not get affected by insects. So how do they keep the insects out? By putting poison in it, and without realizing that part of the poison is going into our own bodies. So I think this connection of big dams, big irrigation projects, and the kind of food which is not very good for your health is being questioned. People are now, more and more people are talking about our traditional wisdom, not the kind of wisdom which says that we had a rocket going to the moon, not that crazy kind of India's past, but more realistic one, where in our traditional practices, we have actually, through experimentation, uh, found that there are advantages of areas which are heavy rainfall, low rainfall, even areas which have low rainfall play their role in the environment. So it's very important that we don't just go around planting trees every space you find, because that's not what's needed. Your earth requires areas which are dry, which are waterlogged, which are lush forests, and that wisdom, I think, slowly man is beginning to accept. And the connections between this and the kind of modern agriculture, so-called modern agriculture, where you say you can get anything any time of the year. You can produce mangoes even in the non-mango season, and they are absolutely tasteless. And maybe the vegetables which are of huge size, I mean, they may be big in size, but they have no taste. So there is this reaction now against that, and there are, I think, uh, more than a dozen people who are selling organic produce. Some of them may be fake, because today we are living in the age of the fake, as you all know. But there are a lot of them who are genuinely doing this, and this is a very good sign. And I would like to congratulate People's Resource Center for bringing this center stage and doing so much study on the data, collecting data on how many people are surviving on this. So it's also a matter of people are asking about realistic concept in India, advantage of heavy rainfall. No, I didn't quite follow that, but um, heavy rainfall areas now. Today we are going to have
Sujit
problems.
ji, that is transcription of what you have said
Okay,
in
okay,
chat
sorry,
box.
sorry. Okay, I was trying to read that. Yeah, so we have very active citizens groups now who are devoting their time and attention to areas of their interest. So some are interested in water, some are interested in even the kind of agriculture which is being producing food for our consumption, uh, about the medicine, about what's good for our health. And I think this is a very exciting time again. And I will stop at this point because I'm sure there'll be others who will contribute. So thank you very much. And in my notes, I've got lots of other things, but I didn't want to read a article. Rather than that, I wanted to react, and I hope that some of it would be found useful. Thank you very much again for having invited me, and good luck to your efforts, which I am sure will bear fruit sooner than later. Thank you.
Thank you, Sujit. I think without wasting time, I will invite Professor Rohit Negi, who is an associate professor of urban studies at Ambedkar University, Delhi. He has been working on the issues of air pollution advocacy in and around Delhi area since 2015. His interest is in urban change and ecology with specialization in Southern Africa and South Asia. So I would invite Rohit to reflect on this and present his views on this.
Thank you so much, Nishant, and also Mr. Ravi for inviting me. Actually, a lot of what I had planned to say has been covered really well by Nishant already. Not only, I mean, you laid the ground not only in terms of the specifics of the research that you've done, but also placed it in a much wider canvas of global environmental questions and so on. So now I'm just looking at what perhaps I can add to it. Maybe one or two things that can spur some conversation. One, I am a bit intrigued. I was intrigued by the session name, which refers to this idea of new urbanism. And just to give a little bit of a background to it, the whole idea of new urbanism actually emerged in the, I would say, 1990s onwards as a sort of a response to the kind of automobile-centric, oil-dependent, and large-scale infrastructure-dominated view of the city, of the urban, which obviously by the 1990s, 80s, and 90s was fairly clear was also hugely environmentally destructive, right? So these things were realized. It was realized that these things go hand in hand. That you cannot separate infrastructure from economy, from resource use, and from the environment. So you have people started to think about these things together at once rather than as separated. In our context, in the more southern context, one could say context of the global south, these ideas of the automobile, oil-dependent, fossil fuel-dependent urbanism are derivative, right? We took them wholeheartedly. We followed what was going on elsewhere. And there was another thing that was added to them, which is two things, I would say. One is that this notion that if we just follow what is happening elsewhere in the north, we will be like them, right? So this, as someone calls it, very strong expectation of modernity, right? That we just have to follow that path and we will get there. The whole idea of developing and developed world follows that mission, right? That we are on a path somehow. We are on this on this path to reach there. The issue is that they realized the problems with their urbanism already by the 1970s and 80s. And, Mr. Patwardhan also mentioned Rachel Carson's book, which was very important, but many other things were equally important. The London smog, for instance, the deaths related to air pollution that were documented already by the 1970s in the US. So they changed their course, but we remain on that. We still remain on that notion of the path to development through this kind of urbanism. And the second milestone there is again that Nishant actually referred to, which is very important. I would just underscore it, which is how the modern contemporary, so 20th century urban planning that we also derived from elsewhere saw farming and livestock in cities as anachronistic, right? As remnants of a past which should not have a future, or which, and they actively worked to undermine them. But and so many of the things that we now are valuing became overnight illegal, right? They became suddenly unauthorized as things that should not take place and should not be seen or present in cities, right? So that's our second challenge. The only thing I would say, which I would add to what Nishant had said, would be that our planners never quite delivered the city as they wanted to. They never quite managed to do what they intended to do. And so we have farming, and so we have livestock, and so we have a whole world of, as a lot of people are now calling non-humans, in the city that are companion with us, right? That are companion species. And it is only now the last very, very few years where people have started to document very painstakingly the kinds of contributions of all of these other companion species, which we felt and thought that we could remove as pests, which we could remove as, again, as remnants of a previous era, non-modern era, and so on. Right? So there is that baggage, that those two elements of the baggage that we also have to challenge as we document practices like all of you have been doing. So it requires, therefore, attention on many different grounds. Now, the kind of cities that we therefore generated or created are together, I mean, they do things at once. They exploit labor, they exploit the workers, they exploit working classes tremendously. And which is where, you know, profits are created from, which drive real estate and all the rest of our cities. But equally, and together with that, they also exploit ecology, commons, right? So that's the twin sort of exploitative urbanism that we have. And therefore, I'm only, we all know this, I'm only pointing it out for one reason, is therefore that the intervention that we now see, whether, and specifically today in terms of urban farming, therefore have to think about or be evaluated on both these terms, on whether they restore dignity of labor and fair compensation to work, and whether they work towards restoring commons, which sometimes also in many circumstances means restoring ecology, wetlands, for instance, or grasslands and so on and so forth, forest areas in and around the city. Right, so so when we evaluate actions, we have to think about both these things together. And now let's come to, again, I'm just again reiterating three kinds of things that basically one sees around Delhi in terms of urban farming. A lot of attention has already been paid by Nishant to the different kinds of farming on Yamuna floodplain, so I won't go into that. There is also the startup sort of business entrepreneurial ventures that are now out there. For instance, you know, not only hydroponics, but also renting land in peri-urban areas. Also coming and growing food on your terraces. And, you know, for a little bit of money that you pay, someone would come and tend to all the vegetables that can be grown on terraces, and then you have a ready supply and so on. And then third, and so this entrepreneurial side, I would just say, has to be evaluated on those two dimensions that I just mentioned earlier. And I think more work is required on that aspect. Perhaps as an extension of your project, you could think about doing further research on that entrepreneurial business in terms of its contribution, but it's also in terms of its sustainability and the aspects of labor exploitation and so on, if at all. But the third, which requires, or which actually gets even less attention, is the question of the very rural. the rural Delhi area, because not only are people changing their livelihoods in response to what the city is doing and how the city is impinging on their lives. So, for instance, brick kilns are huge. These days, there are these small-scale tile manufacturing units that dot the entire landscape around the city, and of course, cause pollution not only to the city but to the village areas itself. Right. So people don't talk about air pollution in villages, but it's a big problem even there. So there is that one has to contend with, right? These other which promise perhaps quick money, quick returns. So how do we think? How do we deal with that? While there is a lot of knowledge and skills that people have related to agriculture, which are being lost at the same time, especially as the city, as these villages get even more and more engulfed by the city. So you have the loss of a whole generation worth of knowledge of water, of land, of soil, that is being lost simultaneously. Can we have ways through which we can document? So for instance, we are trying a little bit. I'm also just wanted to mention that in addition to teaching here, I'm also directing the Center for Community Knowledge at AUD. And one of our projects that we have started, already some work has gone into it, is called Delhi Dehat Ki Kahani, which is documenting these practices and knowledges, and seeing how things are changing and perhaps what we can do through advocacy, and also connecting with people in these areas. Finally, in these areas, they also, the rural in Delhi and also other cities, I'm fully confident about it, are also seen as basically unlimited sink for the detritus of the city, the externalities of the city. So villages have to contend with not only waste, which has been mentioned in the form of landfills, but also new technological sort of interventions like waste to energy plants, which are disastrous. Wherever they have been implemented in the global south, they have been disastrous, unmitigated disasters, including in Delhi, if you can follow the case of Okhla, for instance. And yet they are seen as a silver bullet, they are seen as a win-win solution to the question of waste. And the latest waste to energy plant that is proposed in Delhi, where is it going to come? Again, next to a village where agriculture takes place, where you have thousands of people living. And now they have to fight this. They already 10 years, 15 years ago fought off a sewage treatment plant in their village. Now they have to again, get together and advocate. I don't even know what it would take, given the kind of interest that back these waste to energy sorts of plants. So we have to consider how rural contexts have to struggle with all of these and focus not, of course, Yamuna floodplain is important, but also the agriculture and livelihoods and these kinds of changes in the rural peripheries are equally important to engage with. And one last thing is that perhaps one little window of opportunity that we do have is the growing importance of the climate agenda in planning and in city governance. Perhaps we have some space through which the element of localism, the element of self-sufficiency, and also the less fossil fuel dependence of these forms of agriculture, whether in rural or in the floodplains or on rooftops and terraces, seen together, that perhaps there is some opportunity to connect with the larger climate movement, the larger climate discourses. That's the only sort of window I see in terms of governance, in terms of connecting with planning agenda. And I see that there is a lot of, I'm sure most of you will be aware, there's a lot of push in to have a different sort of notion of the Yamuna floodplain and agriculture in the latest Delhi master plan process, which is a welcome change. We still have to see what in the draft they come up with finally, but there has been a lot of excellent documentation and advocacy around including farming more seriously in city planning documents like master plan. And like Mr. Patwardhan also said, if something can be achieved here, then that can be a exemplar. That can be something that other cities and towns could also point to and point to rather, and try to work with. So I'll stop there. I don't think there's a lot of time left, so I'll stop there. Thanks so much again, and very well done in terms of the report.
Okay. Thanks, Rohit. I think it was very, it's heartwarming that you have been following these things, and I think our thoughts kind of have a lot of similarities, and we can talk about it more after the session, and we can work together. I'll open the session for comments from the participants now. If you want to speak, you can just take the raise hand option that is there in the Zoom. And the questions we have received so far, or the comments, I think I'll just read out unless the speakers themselves want to speak on these issues. I'll start with the first one, which was by Soma KP. And it was about the loss of knowledge is seldom recognized. These are the skills acquired intergenerationally and refined and nuanced over centuries. So this is a loss that we seldom recognize. That was Somaji's comment. I think Reddy is trying to speak, but I'll just read the comments first, which we received in the chat box. Pallavi Verma Patil shared with us that it might be useful to invoke a radical imagination of urban-rural synergies based on Tagore's writing titled City and the Village for food, farming, waste, and other various aspects that Nishant has highlighted. Thanks. I think just to also endorse that, I think City and the Village is a perfect reading for anyone who is interested in these issues. And there was also a comment by Dilruba Shubra. I believe we need to start thinking of de-urbanizing our cities. And urban agriculture could be a great start. Cities can't play the role of being sole consumers only. And there were also references shared by Rosama, which I think were very, very important. There's this question by Akshita. When you talk of intervention to tackle the harmful effects of urbanization, does it fit into the movement for climate justice? Could you please connect this idea with it? This is a question we can take, and anyone of the speakers can respond. Let's keep this with us, but I will also request Reddy ji to share his thoughts.
Thank you, Nishant. I thought I'll just make a few comments based on your presentation. I think some of them overlap with what Rohit Negi has said. First, I think when we are talking of urban farming, we have built all our urban areas as consumption areas. So now when we are talking of production, especially nature-based production, I think we are going to encounter a lot of challenges. Second, I think in India, of course, all over the world, agriculture in endemic areas, basically traditional agriculture areas, it has become a difficult profession for various reasons. So when we are now saying we will bring it back to urban areas, I think again we need to understand more where does the problem lie with the current agriculture. So having said those two things, I thought one, you mentioned in Delhi, 15% of the food is coming from urban farming. I think it might help if we understand who is consuming this food. I think it is distributed. I don't think it is coming to Azadpur Mandi as in quintals or tons. So I think it will be very important to understand who is consuming it. Because as I said, production, economics, I think all those issues will come up when we try to analyze who is consuming that. Now coming to urban farming, here in Hyderabad and various places, we have been associated. So I will just want to disaggregate our understanding. When we are saying farming, I think we usually think it's only crops. So, but farming includes varied activities, and some of which are still continuing in urban areas like dairy farming. I think Rohit mentioned that as well. So many urban cities, even today, there are dairy farms within the city, heart of the city. And of course, there are mobile barriers. You know, you have a lot of cartoons on the buffaloes moving around on the roads, and people think it is not a world-class city if there is a buffalo going on the road. So I think these imageries, I think that I think will be one challenge which we need to counter. And second, I know when we are saying farming, in urban areas, tree farming is still problematic because urban areas are built to avoid. You might have crops, but trees are very problematic. In that sense, proposition. Now, three areas I think we need to look at in urban farming. One, which you mentioned already, residual land, which are mostly in the suburbs. As the city expands, wherever residual lands are there, but eventually they vanish. So I think that is one area we need to understand, because in master plans, I have discussed with various master plan authorities. You know, I said, why don't you include a agriculture zone in the master plans? Because when you are, you know, all master plans avoid core city planning, where they think it's already done, and go into the suburbs. So there you have only 2, 3 zones, and nowhere you'll find agriculture zone to encourage that. So I think there we have some policy advocacy coming up. Second is we have wetlands, dirty wetlands. Now you can see, you know, all cities have rivers, and all these rivers have cesspools of sewage, and there is some production happening using this water. So this dirty wetland waste agriculture production is there already. So in our urban farming, I think we need to detailedly analyze what is happening there. Of course, in terms of quality of food, because you know, there's a lot of contamination, but is it really contaminated? Because you know, we are seeing in Hyderabad 40 kilometers of agriculture, you know, especially paddy is raised from the water coming from river Musi, and that's consumed. I don't know where, but we are not sure what is happening with the health of those people who are consuming paddy. You know, leafy vegetables is something different. So palak usually it picks up a lot of minerals, and also dirty minerals or metals from the dirty water. That's the nature of all the leafy vegetables. So palak could be toxic wherever they are raised in dirty wetlands. But what about the fish? I think Kolkata, I think many places this kind of food is also raised. So the work related to that food production, I think still remains. And whenever we are talking of urban farming, I think this is going to come. Third, I think we are talking of agriculture happening on concrete lands. So concrete lands, I mean terrace gardens, balconies. So you know, since urban areas are completely concrete, so we have pots, and also all this concrete farming. I think concrete lands there. We have to people who do completely organic, because of there are others who do input into agriculture. So I feel we need not take it straight away that these people are organic. So there are people who use pesticides. So when we are talking of urban farming, I think we need to look at these three kinds of farming and see where we can, as a civil society, intervene. So there, of course, you mentioned a lot of positives about urban farming. One, of course, it is going to close the loop in the circular economy. So I think urban farming is the only way we can complete the loop which we are talking about
Reddy,
in
the
waste circular economy. We think
the
very,
net
very important is because of, yeah, just two
the
points.
network is
Just 2 points.
breaking. So yeah.
Okay. Yeah, yeah. So I was saying one is circular economy. Second is, I think this is very important is production. Natural production always adds to a positive social psychology. So I think urban youth and children require urban farming. As someone, I think just now you were reading that question about how the harmful effects of urbanization is the psychology. I think mostly mental issues are going to come up. So urban farming, if you bring it back in whatever form, I think that can be one balm on the this social psychology which is going bonkers. Finally, I think you mentioned about knowledge and skills. So, but most of these people who have knowledge and skills of agriculture, they reside in these kind of areas. So, in urban planning, do we see any options where we can link them with the urban farms? Because right now, what is happening is only middle class with the resources they are doing urban farming or with out of their own interest. So, how do we link this existing knowledge and skills with the resource owners? I think that's one issue which we need to understand. I mean, try to think more in depth. And finally, I think just as a comment, of course, now as all of us are concerned about environment, so the distance between production and consumption, I think that's one of the indicators of how sustainable is your production and consumption. So I think urban farming is again a solution which can reduce the distance between production and consumption. So as part of climate change, I know solutions which we are talking about. I think this can be, we can talk about urban farming as well. So finally, as I mentioned, plots and fallow lands in urban areas. I think we need to talk about some legal mechanism. Because long back I heard in Mumbai, if you close a flat and you go away for 10, 15 years, I think a municipal corporation can seize the flat, and because they think that flat or residential residence can be a source of ill health. So as part of public health, to protect public health, municipal corporation can seize that residence and restore it. So maybe we can look at fallow lands as well, and how we can bring it back to agriculture in urban areas or in the suburban areas. So I'll close there. Thank you for giving me the time.
Okay. I mean, very important points, and thanks for sharing those, Reddy. I think some of these we have included in our advocacy, for example, in our letter to SG and all, the meetings that we had over the master plan of Delhi that has been prepared. Now the draft is probably going to be out in public in the next week. So we did try to include all these things. But yeah, it helps, and we need to have more dialogue with other regions in terms of what is the better way to go forward with this agenda. I think I will now invite Soumyada for his for sharing his.
Thank you, Nishant, and thank you, PRC, for organizing this. I'll be very brief. I think the concerns that are being raised are nothing new, but these are very relevant for the times, because these concerns are there for the last 20 years, as we have been seeing, and throughout the world, not only in India. It has been repeatedly raised. A lot of practices have been done, localization, reuse of resources, or closing the cycle. I'll just like to remind people that in India, we have an excellent, very well documented example. When I'm saying documented, means very well scientifically studied and documented example of how urban so-called waste can be utilized for urban food production. And in farming, I'm not saying farming, I'm saying urban food production, where farming is one subset. And this is in East Calcutta wetlands. This is a long-standing practice, and thousands and thousands of people, who are mostly a major part of them were actually replaced from DVC, the dams, in the early 50s, mid 50s. So this is a very clear example of how, which is so-called waste, urban sewage, which can be treated at multiple layers, because there is fish production, which is a very high value, and it's a very important protein source for that region. Then that treated water goes to rice fields or paddy fields, and the paddy fields get a water, and then much cleaner water goes out to agricultural areas in the rural hinterland. So this is an excellent example. And if we really want to replicate urban food production and its climate and other impacts, I'll talk tomorrow. Tomorrow is their session. But I think this is an excellent example. And the positive point is this has been scientifically studied. This is very well documented. The UN, this Global 500, this also included this as an outstanding example of how cities can do. And this is also, as Narasimha Reddy has said very correctly, that present global consciousness is that you have to localize as much as possible. This is also an example how a fairly large part of the food production can be localized. And then the last part I want to mention, this also is a positive example how cities are not only suckers, consumers, but also can give out something to the rural areas. Instead of putting out dirty water, sewage and others, they can put out much cleaner water, which will be useful with some organic nutrient for agriculture. Of course, let me conclude with this. The situation now is getting complicated because along with biological waste, which is sewage, we are also adding a lot of chemical waste, chemical contaminants, which is not from agriculture, but from a lot of urban sort of household and industrial uses, not only industrial, because the urban household chemical uses has gone up tremendously, and this goes out with the wastewater. So that needs to be taken care of. But this is a very good example which is there, well documented, studied, and recommended. Thank you.
Thank you, Soumyada. I think, and I would also remind everyone that sorry. So, am I audible?
Yes, yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, okay. So I was just saying that if Sujit or Rohit wants to respond to any of the points that have been raised after your presentation, especially to the question which Akshita raised about climate justice and how this can be framed as a thing, very briefly, because we have about 5 minutes left for the session. If Sujit wants to have some concluding comments on this.
Nishant bhai, I guess
I think he's
Sujit
not
sir has
here,
another appointment. That's why he left.
Okay. Sorry. Rohit, do you want to make any concluding comments?
No, not really. I already towards the end I was speaking about just some about the climate agenda, and perhaps there were a couple of comments I later saw, and so that was addressed a little bit. Of course, there's much more that can be said, but that's perhaps for another time.
Yeah.
So I have nothing more to add. It's been excellent listening to all of you and connecting. Thanks.
Sure. Okay, I think it was a great session. I think we had little time to go deeper into a lot of aspects which we have just touched upon or even did not touch upon in this session. I think that's why we have 5 more sessions to come up in the next 3 days. Every day, 11 to 1 and 3 to 5, there will be sessions. You can join using the same link. We'll also send a reminder before half an hour before each session. I think now I will hand over to Akis for final thanks note, and let's see you all in the 3 to 5 session.
Yeah, thanks. Thanks for your presence and participation in this session. We hope this was useful for you in some ways. Yeah, we also welcome your feedback and suggestions over email. Our email ID is prc.india@yahoo.com. We'll also write that in the chat box. And special thanks to Rajendra Ravi, our speaker Sujit Ji, Rohit, and moderator Nishan. We cannot thank enough for the kind support of Amit Kumar, Archana Singh, for doing language interpretation, and Mohini, Ria Arora, and Astitva for live summary. Thank you, friends. Thank you very much. We are having the next session today in the evening from 3 to 5 p.m. The theme of the session is urban-rural disconnect. So I hope you will be able to join us there. It would be great to see you there. Goodbye, take care, and stay safe. Thank you. We'll be ending the session.